Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the adventure anthology, The Princess Project, designed by Ashton Duncan, Carlos Cisco, Catherine Evans, Shireen Gilchrist, Noah Grand, Emily Harmon, Peter Harris, Brittany Hay, Jessica Markram, Harry Whitelaw, for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links if you're online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Basil, Huskarl124, Wizard Princess, my favorite D&D player, Christopher and David, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos de Vicente, Gilberto, Sean A.K., Cert to be Adam, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Arash, Limpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Sklenia, Nick. Thank you all very much for your support. Now, if you're anything like me, you grew up in a time of the Disney princess animated movies, the late 80s throughout the 90s, hit a little bit of a bump in the 2000s, and then kind of resurfaced in the 2010s with like Tangled and Frozen. Welcome to my Disney YouTube channel where I talk about animated movies. Now, this is a preamble for the Princess Project, which is a collection of 9 mini-adventures that are inspired by classic princess stories. Not all of them are direct Disney princess stories, of course, and if you've delved into those actual fairy tales, they are, of course, been heavily Disney-ified to where almost some of them are unrecognizable from their original stories. I think it's a cool idea, and it is certainly not the first adventure or series of adventures that I have reviewed based on classic fairy tales, and it can kind of run the gamut between trying to adhere too strictly to the original source material and thus coming off as very linear or just not doing enough to change it, to taking the clever twist route and changing things up enough, or just, you know, making it so it uses enough of the cool and different things that D&D can bring to make it an original story, while still everybody can kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge over the source material that we all recognize that it's from. And I think this does, overall, a good job of the latter, although it still is constrained a bit by the former. Some of the adventures I like a lot more than others. I will say the production values are incredible. There is original cover art for each of these 9 adventures, full-page cover art that would be like the cover of its own separate product, which is incredibly impressive. It's also very, very well organized in that every single adventure features the adventure background, multiple adventure hooks. A lot of them include a dramatis personae, which is a listing of all the major NPCs, including traits, bonds, flaws, and ideals. And usually it's organized into chapters or acts, despite all of these adventures only being about 8 or 9 pages long. These are mini, tiny, teeny tiny adventures. Some of them use that limited space very, very well and still craft a very complete story. And others, you can tell, were very constrained by how short it was and feel like they are either a slice of a larger story or they just wrap up all the things that they've set in motion a little too quickly. I won't be able to do a very big deep dive into each of these individually because there are 9 of them, and I'm going to be reviewing the whole product together. So I'll kind of go over which ones and kind of give a thumbs up and thumbs down on the adventures. Please don't think I'm being very dismissive of all these adventures. It's just that I don't have the time to actually go through and really critically analyze each one. But I have read all of them, and I think for me, the overall average is still high. Even the ones that I don't like, there were very few of them. The ones that I did like, there were more, and I think overall it's a very good product. As I mentioned, the production value is very good, and it's impressive, and I like the fact that we still have stories to tell from very classic adventures and myths of, you know, like Sleeping Beauty or Frozen or Shrek, to use some more recent examples of stories that are used in here. So I'm impressed that we can still pull from that and for the most part come up with pretty fun, interesting stories. The other impressive aspect is that the stories actually run the gamut from Tier 1 all the way up to Tier 4. So the initial stories are designed for levels like, 1 through 4, Tier 1. And then the actual final one is designed specifically for level 20 PCs, although again it's a very small, that's an example of one I think that was a little constrained by the very short length, and it's got a cool idea, but there's just not really much going on in there. But I mean, how do you craft a mini 8-page adventure for level 20 PCs and actually make it super compelling? Like, that's a very challenging thing. I think the 2 tier 1 adventures, the first 2 are the weakest in my opinion. Foul Suitors is based on the Swan Lake, which I think was originally a play or a classic song, I believe, or it's a ballet, right? It's the whole swan. But anyway, it's just too obviously that story. It's a woman who's been transformed into a swan, and she's got there's somebody else who's pretending to be her, and there's this kind of political intrigue behind the scenes. It's not bad. It's just not. It doesn't really do enough with that material, and there was an excellent opportunity to change things just a little bit to provide that fairy tale with a twist kind of dash that has been so popular in the last couple years, if not decades, to where that's its own like genre fairy tale. But this, you could have made her transform into anything that would have been slightly more interesting, like a freaking owl bear or an axebeak or some, I don't know, what's a bird-like D&D creature. Like, you could have done any number of these things to make it more of a, give it that little D&D twist, give it that fantasy twist to make it a little more interesting and have more going on. Instead, it's just kind of a, one of the inspirations it mentions at the beginning, which I do like this section, where it talks about games, movies, literature, even fashion that have inspired all these different princess tales. And one of them under games is Untitled Goose Game, which is really funny. It's a really fun indie game, by the way, in which you're just an asshole goose and messing with people. It's like a little adventure puzzle game. And that's kind of what this one reminds me of, is she's just a kind of an asshole swan, and you kind of have to chase after her a little bit. It's all very comical and a little bit silly. But I just wish they would have done a little bit more with the adventure to make it more D&D-y. Tying the knot, really cute cover page here. The actual story is that these 2 warring families, the 2 princesses are getting married, and you have to collect a bunch of items to celebrate their union and make it official or whatever. And that's pretty much it. Like, you just wander around to different merchants and do different skill checks for them. So, for example, you might be moving crates for somebody, or finding somebody's lost kittens. All of them just involves a skill check. You're just going around. It's extremely linear. You're just hitting up all these different merchants or areas, and you're doing a thing. There might be a single combat, I think, somewhere. Yeah, there's like a myconid. You have to go into a cave. But otherwise, there's just, I don't know. I didn't really get anything much from that one. There's not much going on. There's just a little scavenger hunt, and there's no real, I don't know, choices or anything to make there. It just, I don't know, it feels kind of just by the numbers. Color of Bravery, and what's bad is those are the first 2 adventures I read, so I was feeling kind of down on the whole anthology, to be honest. And then we get to Color of Bravery, and all of a sudden this one is freaking incredible, because the princess is a flump, which is like an underdark jellyfish thing, which are all good-natured, and she is fleeing her city because her city is under invasion by a bunch of illithids, that classic tale. I don't know what this is based on, by the way. And the adventurers find her on the surface, and you go down. There's a lot of cool scripted encounters along the way that you can meet up with. This drow merchant being, having her wagon pulled by giant spiders. There's a bullet, how do you all pronounce that? Named Susie, who's being attacked by gnolls. Of course, you have to fight some mind flayers on your way down. And then Act 2, once you get to the city, is actually convincing the Flump Council about you either need to fight the illithids or flee from the illithids, and I assume most players are going to want to, rally the defenses and fight. And each of them have a very detailed list of where they're coming from and what skill checks are required. In other words, like, one of the counselors is in love with another one, so if you can just be nice to them or convince them, then the other one will fall in line. Some of them have more of a military history, so if you fought some of the mind flayers coming in, then you can say, hey, we're capable of fighting mind flayers, then that'll have advantage on that check. So it does a really cool job of bringing some of the encounters you just did matter into this second act. And there's also one of them is being controlled by an intellect devourer, so it's actually like the illithids have a mole on the inside. Another one is just a deva in disguise, which is really funny, so of course they're all going to want to fight and protect the Flump colony. And then the third act is you either fighting or you're fleeing, and then that depends on the choices that you made. So I think it just does a really good job of balancing the social pillar, the exploration pillar, and the combat pillar, while also twisting the entire princess thing on its head because you're helping a bunch of flump jellyfish things and making it super exotic in the Underdark. Just absolutely fantastic. Super thumbs up on that one. Heir to Chaos, really, really cool artwork here. Is, I believe, the riff on Frozen, where you are helping a young princess who has awakened her magical abilities, very much like Elsa in Frozen, and she is already at this dungeon, or at the entrance to the dungeon, where she's supposed to take this trial to help her focus her magic, but she's super she lacks confidence. She's worried that she might hurt people. I mean, it's very much like Act 1 Frozen. But what's cool is that it's basically an escort mission, but the players have a huge job in that not only do they need to help and protect her, but they need to build her confidence and teach her how to use her powers. And of course, you're supposed to roll on the wild magic table every time she casts a spell, although as a DM, you can kind of futz that around a little bit and play around with depending on how the players are doing. Maybe she can start manifesting good results or bad results. And we do get a custom wild magic table in here if you want to use that one besides the one that's provided in the player's handbook. So it's a really neat idea, and you go through this little dungeon crawl of like trials that you have to help. One of them is just, I believe, fighting a dragon. And by the time we get to here, we're already in Tier 2, by the way. This is for 6th through 10th level. So only those first 2 adventures, the ones I wasn't too hot on, are the Tier 1 through 4 adventures. The rest of these are all solidly like 5 through 10, 6 through 10. So they offer, you have a lot more options. It really opens up the world into using, different kinds of monsters and tactics and situations, which is always fun. The one thing lacking from this one and from the entire product in general is we get no battle maps whatsoever. Now, only about half of the adventures in here would actually require a battle. I mean, think about that one that you just went around to different merchants and just did skill checks. Like, you don't need a map for that. That would almost take up too much time to try to put out maps. So I'm not looking for maps for that kind of thing. But this one that literally has a mini dungeon crawl, including annotations, and it even says at one point the following locations are keyed to map 1.1. There is no map included in this product. I checked. Like, there's nothing embedded in here. There's no separate map download. I don't know what it's talking about in terms of a map, but there are no maps in here. Now, there's only, like, again, maybe a third of them that I would think really need maps. I would love maps for half of them, but we get no maps whatsoever. And you'll know, as somebody who plays on a VTT, I love my battle maps, and a good battle map can always make a huge difference for me when looking at an adventure. It's a big bummer that this one especially, because I really do like how this adventure is constructed. I like the way it's basically an escort mission, but you still need to, role play with that character, and you want to build their successes, because the end actually involves a choice. You are given an option at the end to either take the red pill or the blue pill. She can either take the the Eon Stone or the Dampening Stone. And one of them, she basically accepts her destiny as a spellcaster, because only spellcasters can inherit the throne in her kingdom, and goes back and it's all a happy ending. Or the other option is if she met with a bunch of failures, or the PCs weren't able to convince her, then she takes the Dampening Stone, purposely seals herself off for magic, and then has to just split from everything, like abdicate the throne and just kind of go her own way. And she's still pretty satisfied with that result, but it's kind of dissatisfying from a story standpoint. But I like the fact that that choice is given. I think that's really cool. So very fun. To Wash Away This Dirt is the most exotic and different one of the bunch, if you can't tell by the freaking cover art here. I don't know what this one is based on either, which I think is nice. The fact that I can't immediately say, oh, this is The Little Mermaid, this is Beauty and the Beast. A lot of them are very clever and interesting ideas that I couldn't even place what it's based on, other than they all technically involve princesses in some way. In this case, it's a very war-torn land of tribes, and the princess of a tribe has ostensibly been captured by the warmongering bugbear tribe, except they haven't heard from her, and now the elders suspect that she is actually working with the bugbears, and you are hired to assassinate her, which is a big twist. And then the twists keep coming as you eventually find out, once you kind of battle your way and explore your way through the bugbear warband, you realize that she technically is working with the bugbears, but she is still ultimately working in service of her people. She is performing a infernal ritual that she thinks will protect her people, but in fact, it's another twist in that she is working with Zariel, and she, unbeknownst to the princess, she will actually cast her entire people into Avernus. That's part of the, like, yeah, we'll protect you, we'll just pull you into hell and we can protect you there. So there's a neat little bit of twist there. There's this whole, it's not really a side plot because I guess it comes into the main plot of this war. The bugbear general or the chief and the general had a baby together, which is taboo, and there's another person being blamed for that. There's this whole other plot that kind of comes into play at the end because you can take the baby mama and go talk to the chieftain and have a big out there. So it's kind of a lot of these, the theme is that the climax is actually a socializing or role-playing scene rather than a big combat encounter, which is obviously different from a lot of D&D stuff, which is more video game based, although you could also argue video games are actually based on D&D, RPGs at least, in that they often end with a big combat encounter. In this case, 90% of them actually end with a big social moment, so that's something I had to really wrap my head around, because I come from that point of view of like, oh, it's got to be a big boss fight at the end, because it's, I mean, let's face it, D&D is basically a combat simulator. It happens to have, role playing that you can engage in. But I do like that it's kind of emphasized in a lot of these adventures is that the final moment is actually this big climactic social encounter, which is a hard thing to do, again, in an adventure that's only 8 or 9 pages long. It's hard to make you really care for those, characters and create that. You could do most of these in a one-shot, and it can be difficult to try to create that big climactic social moment, but I think the tools, for the most part, are given to DMs to allow that to happen. So that one ends up being, I think, okay. It's not necessarily one I can quite wrap my head around, but I appreciate there's a lot of interesting ideas there, and it's way different from the others. Silver Princess is another one of my favorites. This one, I believe, is the Shrek one, if I had to guess, because in Shrek there's a twist where, spoilers for 2001's Shrek, I guess, the princess that everybody is set out to rescue is Princess Fiona from the dragon, is secretly it's been a while. Secretly, I believe, an ogre who has been disguised as a human princess. She's an ogress, I think. Anyway, the twist here is that the princess who has been captured by the dragon is actually the dragon itself. So she's been given this kind of crown that suppresses her powers, and she kind of fled her kingdom because she was transforming into a half-dragon. He uses the half-dragon stat block. And then they've seen lately, this silver dragon flying around, and the dumbass king doesn't quite make the connection and just thinks that the princess has been kidnapped by a dragon. The thing that I like about this adventure is it involves 3 NPC hero groups who have all been hired, because it's a very classic, like, the king has just put up a bounty of this much gold and titles for whomever rescues the princess. And all of these different characters stand up and raise their hand and go to join. And the players can choose one of these 3 figures to travel with, or I guess none of them, in order to ally themselves with to go and rescue her. And they range from a fairly good-natured half-orc knight who kind of likes the princess but hasn't really seen her in a while. Kind of good heart, I guess. The Shrek character, if you will. Prince Elliot of Zerus, which is a disguised rogue and con artist, so completely in it for the riches, doesn't really give a crap about anything else. And then a Lady Knight Oriole Brimstone, which is a great name, who is in it for challenge and adventure, and she's just kind of war hardened and everything. And they all have their own different people with them, either thugs or knights or something. And you can choose which one to bring with you, and whichever 2 you don't bring with you, you can encounter as random encounters while getting to the actual tower dungeon that the dragon princess is in. And there's some cool, scripted encounters you can have with them. There's some neat role-playing moments, and then of course they can appear also at the end, especially if the one you didn't encounter you can meet there. And it's this really interesting dynamic too, where you discover the truth. There's, again, the climax is often this big social role-playing moment, so you can discover the truth in different ways about the dragon instead of having to fight the dragon. And then all these other NPCs will show up, and then there's another big, conversation to be had there, I guess. I think if done well, you can pull this off very fun, and it does. Again, what I really like it is when adventures include a bunch of scripted encounters that you can have along the way, and a lot of these are either non-combat related, or if they do have combat, the combat is related in some way or has an effect on later events. So it's not just combat for the sake of combat, in other words. So I do like that. In this case, it's meeting up with the other those other NPCs. So I think that works really well. This is another case, though, that was really missing a map, because I think the whole little tower dungeon could have been given a battle map, and we don't get that for some reason. But I do like the NPC knights in that one. I think that's a lot of fun. Golden Plates and Golden Rules is an adventure based on Sleeping Beauty. This one is crazy because it starts off, the adventure background is jaw-droppingly serious. Like, it goes into some places where it's like, this is the dark, mature telling of Sleeping Beauty, where Sleeping Beauty, like, all of her friends and family died because she was asleep for 100 years. This king finds her, cuts his way through the brambles, rapes her repeatedly, and she gives birth while all asleep, by the way. And then only when, one of her babies goes to suckle, then it sucks the poison out or something, is what I understood. And then she wakes up. And she wakes up and she's got kids and a man in her bed, and it's just fucking weird. And none of that really necessarily plays into the adventure. It's just a fucking crazy backstory. It's very dark and serious. I'm thinking, okay, this is a very dark and serious story. And it plays out like kind of a weird sequel to what Sleeping Beauty is. And it's a shame that we already kind of got the twist on Sleeping Beauty with these semi-recent Maleficent movies, which kind of did a fun job of switching the focus to Maleficent rather than Sleeping Beauty. In this case, Sleeping Beauty is your quest giver, and she wants you to go kill the Maleficent figure, although in this case her name is something different, Carboss or something, who is a dragon stat block. So, and obviously it even gets crazier too with the backstory. Like, eventually, the wife is the wife of the king, tries to get the kids killed, and then she ends up killing the king, and then declares herself queen. It's just, I was reading all this and I was like, this is just a fantastic story. Just write this story as the dark, mature, crazy version of Sleeping Beauty, or maybe that's the one that's really based on. I don't know. But then the actual story kind of goes in a very almost generic adventure-y way after that. You just go and journey to the castle. You talk to I keep wanting to call her Maleficent. Carboss is the fairy witch, I guess. And you could fight her, but the adventure wants you to just talk to her, and then she opens up a portal to where the fairies make laws. It's called Red Tape Bureaucracy. And you can go talk to the fairy lawmaker and then convince him to change the laws so that fairies don't basically do that anymore. But they don't cast spells if they're not properly invited to weddings. It's almost goofy. It starts off on such a serious, mature note and then ends up in such a goofy, weird place where you're talking to fairy bureaucrats by the end. It does a weird tonal shift. I had whiplash after this one, so I thought this one was very, very bizarre and not necessarily in a good way. The Regent of Ithaca is the only one, I believe, based on a classic Greek mythology tale, in this case, the Odyssey and the Iliad. The Odyssey, specifically, I believe, is I think that's the one where it's the return home, where Odysseus goes through all these different fun trials with a bunch of classic mythological monsters and things. And this one is a really fun twist, because Penelope, which is the woman Odysseus is trying to return to, his wife, is the actual quest giver, and she has had a good old time since Odysseus has been gone. She has been ruling this kingdom. It's in a period of peace and prosperity, and she does not want this dude coming back. She doesn't necessarily want him any ill will, but he's he's fine off doing his adventuring thing. I'm fine being a head of state here. Just go ahead and travel over to where I think he's at now, and just make sure he's gone for a little while longer. I thought that was a fantastic story hook and really funny. But the adventure, again, doesn't actually... I feel like this one is very constrained by the length, because there's not a whole lot you can actually do. You're only on... I was picturing, bouncing around to different islands and doing those different things and kind of following, Odysseus around and fucking him up. But, again, this is an 8-page adventure, and mostly what you do, they're on one island. You can sow a little bit of discord between this maybe potential wedding that's going to happen between Odysseus, who's posing as another person called Metis, I believe. You can talk to a gold dragon to help. You can talk to Athena herself to help slow him down. You can talk to a sea witch because Poseidon has it out for Odysseus. It's just a whole bunch of just talking to people and kind of convincing them to slow her down. It starts off really, really interesting. I don't think it does enough with the actual story idea. And the final one, Love's Bind, is the level 20 adventure, and this one involves an infernal wedding. and is kind of based on Beauty and the Beast, although really it just has, like, the main character is named Beauty and her lover, I guess, is named Beast. But that's otherwise it's you go to a chapel in hell. That's pretty fun. There's some fun things you can do here, but again, there's not, I don't think, enough going on. You basically just have to convince the groom to step down and stop trying to be a dick, and that's pretty much the entire climax there. So it was a bit disappointing. I do like that this one specifically states, hey, we know most people don't play at level 20, so here's how to change the balance around if your players A are new at level 20 and just playing like, hey, here's a level 20 character sheet. If you've been here technically before, then here's like the mid-range. And if you're well optimized, you know exactly what you're doing to maximize your character, you know, you theory craft D&D characters in your spare time, then here's the third one you can use. I thought that was a really cool idea. I haven't seen any level scaling, and none of these adventures really necessarily need that, but this one does include it, which I thought was very helpful because level 20 is such a crazy, weird thing to try and wrap your head around an adventure to do, and even to do like an 8-page adventure. So overall, I mean, if you can go back and hear all my positives and minuses, I think the positives outweigh the minuses. Yes, there are some that I thought were not great. There were some that I thought were decent, and there were some that I thought were fantastic. And I do think the overall average is definitely very positive. Also, although we lack maps, we do get a really good appendix, or I guess appendices. I think there's only one. Yeah, they're not actually separated by multiple appendices. You get a custom wild magic table, as I mentioned, for the, I believe it's the Heir of Chaos one. Custom trinket table. We also get new magic items and new spells, and here's where you can really start seeing the inspiration from classic, especially Disney movies, and some really fun ideas like the scrying mirror. I liked the spindle. Diadem of Snow has a bunch of ice powers. The spells, Friends on the Other Side, Ice Castle, Child of Triton, Mouse into Servant, Midnight Ride turns a gourd into a carriage. If I have to explain these references to you, then I'm sorry you had such a unfulfilling childhood, but these are very obvious spell references, and I think they're pretty fun, and you can see the production values are very nice. I love the artwork throughout. So overall, I think it's a very, very strong product, even if I didn't necessarily like all of the adventures that are included here. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for the Princess Project. Pros: each mini adventure is well organized with background, overview, adventure hooks, and multiple chapters. Pro: large variety of challenges and levels from tier 1 all the way to tier 4. Especially I like the fact that most of them are actually in that nice tier 2 to tier 3 range. They're not all just low level. Pro: most adventures have detailed character notes with traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. Pro: the Silver Princess, Heir to Chaos, and The Color of Bravery are standout adventures that offer fun twists on classic tales. I wanted to shout out to my 3 favorite adventures as being particularly amazing. Pro: the lengthy appendix with new magic items, spells, and a D100 table of trinkets inspired from Princess Tales. And Pro: incredible artwork. Basically, we get a cover page on every single adventure, which is like 9 cover pages plus the actual cover page on here, which were really, really good. That's a lot of pros, by the way. That's up there with some of my most that I've ever given. Cons: some adventures are extremely linear and or adhere too strictly to their source material. I could also add that maybe they were more constrained by their word count. Basically, just I didn't like all the adventures here. I think overall it's still very strong, but there were some that were definitely lacking in for different reasons. And the other con is there are no maps whatsoever, which is always a bummer. I do think it's not as big of a bummer here because a lot of the adventures did not need maps, but the ones that did, it's a glaring omission. Final verdict: featuring a welcome variety of stories and playstyles, the Princess Project proves that there is still plenty of value to be mined from classic tales and myths. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. You can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.